You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 24th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Can Russia and Ukraine at least agree to stop sniping at each other at sea? Does Israel's renewed war on Gaza have any clearer an idea of victory? And when is a pint not a pint? I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. My guests Giorgia, Scaturro and Yossi Mekelberg will discuss the day's big stories, and Charles Hecker will have the latest on the ceasefire talks in Riyadh. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I am joined today by Giorgia Scaturro, London-based Italian reporter and producer, and by Yossi Mekelberg, Senior Consulting Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Giorgia, first of all, you are keeping Italians up to date with the imminent visit by King Charles III, and obviously whenever the King of England goes anywhere, it's quite a production, but this is an especially complicated one because we're not terribly sure about how, well, in what sort of state to receive him one of his hosts is going to be.
Correct. So although King Charles has been officially invited by our president of Italy, Mattarella, in fact, the visit starts at the Vatican, and in the year of the Jubilee, it's an important message. The Pope is supposed to meet King Charles, first time visiting Italy as a king and not as a prince with Queen Camilla, and it's all about the symbolism of reconciliation between Catholic faiths, except the Pope might not be ready, might be absent on that visit. So at the moment, all is set to happen. We've had intelligence last week that the visit is still planned to go ahead. The Pope has been dismissed from hospital, although yesterday, although he has this 2 months recovery stage, which makes us a little bit nervous about what will happen on the 8th of April when the meeting is going to happen, but so far so good.
I mean, just quickly to follow that up, because as you correctly pointing out, the Pope has been released from hospital. There's some indication that he is doing slightly better than he was, but he is the age he is. He is an ill man. And obviously, when any papacy gets to a point like this, newsrooms all over the world are on tenterhooks because it is obviously a huge story. But what's it like working for Italian media in particular at a moment like this?
Well, Italian media, and I have to say the British media at the same time are very tense about this, because let's not forget we enter in Easter, which is one of the most important festivities and celebrations in Catholic, and we will broadcast the live message of the Pope on Easter Day on the BBC, the Urbi et Orbi, extremely poignant, a significant message. So, yes, we're all up to preparing Plan B although, as you rightly pointed out, the Pope is 88. He looks really frail, although yesterday, first day out of the hospital, managed to greet the believers, the followers, and even recognizing some of the faces that have been following him through his 13 years journey as a Pope. So there are indications that the Pope, at least mentally, he's there and willing to be back at St. Peter's Square as soon as possible. However, yes, it looked particularly frail, so plans B we have to be a little bit creative about planning plan Bs.
Yossi, on more earthly matters, we have interrupted you tonight on your journey to the theatre.
Well, you know, the most important thing
is a seamless pivot right there.
Yeah. No, this is the most important thing, to be on the daily. Then I'm going to have to the theatre, watching Dear England. which is fitting because actually England is playing today against Latvia.
Because Dear England, to be clear, is a play about the football.
About the national team and the end of the era of Gareth Southgate. So it's not just about football, from what I understand, and I will be happy to report after I watch the play, actually, but from what I understand, it's about football as a metaphor. It's about life. It's about expectation. It's about redemption, because Gareth Southgate missed the famous penalty in 1996 in the European semi-final, and how he redeems himself as a manager, but only almost, because England didn't win. So it will be more about life and psychology and building a team. So I very much look forward to watching.
We shall catch up with you on that. You can be our special guest one-off theatre reviewer. Yossi and Giorgia, we will have more from both of you shortly. But first, we start with discussions ongoing in Riyadh about the prospects of a ceasefire in Ukraine. US Envoy Steve Witkoff has said he is hopeful, but US Envoy Steve Witkoff has in recent days said quite a few things about his belief in the good faith and earnest intentions of Russian President Vladimir Putin, which are unlikely to inspire much confidence among Ukrainians. Reports suggest that talks are focused on the prospect of a ceasefire on the Black Sea, if not anywhere else immediately. Meanwhile, a Russian missile strike on Sumy has injured at least 65 people. Well, joining us now from New York City is Charles Hecker, geopolitical risk analyst and author and familiar voice to listeners to The Daily. Charles, first of all, why the focus on the Black Sea? Is this just the one area where everybody thinks they might be able to get along sort of a bit?
I think this is probably a slightly easier ask for the negotiators because it avoids having to discuss issues of troops, troop movements, security guarantees on the ground, and territory and borders. This is aimed at restoring Ukrainian grain exports and securing the Black Sea. And even though every issue in these talks have been so far unsuccessful, maybe talking about the water is a little bit easier than talking about what's going on land.
Well, Russia has talked about renewing the Black Sea Grain Initiative as it was known. This was the agreement that did allow Ukraine to ship grain from its ports across the Black Sea unhindered and unmolested by Russian ships. But why does Russia, well, if Russia wants back into that, why did Russia want out of it?
Well, Russia thought that we're referring to the grain deal that involved inspections by Turkey. And the inspections by Turkey were to guarantee for both sides that there were no weapons going in or out on the Black Sea in any of these shipments that were for grain deliveries. And Russia sort of threw its toys out of the pram on this a couple of years ago, saying that it didn't believe that Ukraine was adhering to the rules of the exchange and to the deal. So, the grain shipments through the Black Sea stopped. And, I think they're going to this because, look, they met a week ago to try to discuss a halt on targeting energy infrastructure. That never happened. They're going to try to resolve that again, but here they are just sort of shifting the topic of negotiations one more time away from things that they haven't been able to agree on in the past.
But is that not of a part with Russia's tactics generally throughout this conflict, and especially in the last few weeks, in that Russia never really says entirely no to anything, but just comes up with lots of reasons why it's not quite right or can't quite happen?
That's right. If you're Russia, these negotiations are going great, and you're extremely happy with their outcome. What they've done is they've taken tiny half steps forward, pretending essentially to meet the Americans and the Ukrainians halfway, but really they haven't done any of that. Last week we had what we thought was an agreement to halt attacks on energy infrastructure, although with no date for implementation. And moments after that was allegedly agreed, both sides accused each other of violating the agreement and attacking each other's energy stations. And so Putin and the Russians are playing Ukraine, and more precisely are playing the United States along in all of this by, as you alluded to in your opening remarks, offering sort of prayers and portraits and flattery, and sort of snowing Witkoff a bit in their negotiations with this sort of flowery language, but they haven't really offered anything concrete towards these talks at all.
Well, and just to cut through everything, and finally on this, Charles, because we will doubtless have reason to return to this, if you are looking at the current situation from Russia's perspective right now, if you are President Putin, is there actually any reason why you would want a ceasefire? Does it benefit Russia?
No, there's no reason whatsoever for you to want a ceasefire if you're Russia. The primary pressure on Russia in this conflict right now is economic, not military. And Putin probably thinks that he can continue to squeeze, another year of sort of suffering out of a Russian economy that really is a bit of a basket case. And so he thinks he's doing well on the ground in the war. He has no reason to change his negotiating stance. Moreover, we haven't really seen the United States withdraw any of the carrots that it offered before negotiations even began. So, these negotiations are going very well for Putin, and there's no reason at all for him to change his stake, whether it's on phone calls with President Trump or whether it's a reasonably junior delegation in Riyadh.
Charles Hecker, geopolitical risk analyst and author, thank you as always for joining us. You're listening to The Daily on Monocle Radio. Let's bring our panel back in, Yossi Mekelberg and Giorgia Scaturro, and to Gaza, where Israel has bombed the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. The apparent target was Hamas's chief financial officer, Ismail Bahum, who was killed along with at least one other person. A few hours previously, another member of Hamas's political bureau, Salah al-Bardawil, had been killed in a strike on an encampment of tent shelters in Khan Yunis. They were among at least 61 people killed by Israeli strikes on Gaza in the preceding 24 hours, and among at least 730 since Israel resumed hostilities on March 18th. Yossi, first of all, and it feels like a question we have now been asking about Israel's actions in Gaza for, well, pretty much since October 2023. Does there appear to be much rhyme or reason to this? Do these strikes appear to be being carried out with some sort of longer-term objective in mind, or was it possibly just the case that they got intelligence about the locations of these two gentlemen and decided to act?
I think the answer is in your question, because the fact that we're 18 months talking about the same thing and there is no result. So we have to go back to the first day of the war, after the Hamas massacre. The Netanyahu government set two main objectives: total victory, the elimination of Hamas, and bringing the hostages back. 18 months later, 49,000 Palestinians there. Hamas is still standing and probably recruiting more people right now because of what is happening there, because of the mass killing of Palestinians, because there is no any horizon of hope. 59 hostages are still in the tunnels, around half of them still alive, and it seems that for the Israeli government, it's not a priority. And as far as Netanyahu and his government are concerned, they can actually, if they ever come back, they can come back in coffins. Against what 70% of the Israeli population says in opinion poll after that. So you have to judge it by the objective that were set 18 months ago, and by that it's a failure. But we are not surprised that it started. And look at the day that the war started again last week. It's a day that Netanyahu was supposed to give evidence in court in his corruption trial, that he keeps delaying and delaying and delaying. It's a day that he was supposed to bring to the cabinet the decision of the dismissal of the head of the internal security of the Shin Bet, and many demonstrations in the street. And here is a surprise. The next day that after the war was renewed, the far-right party of Itamar Ben-Gvir returned to the coalition and consolidated the coalition that probably will allow to run its course until 2026. And you know what, the way that it goes, and I really think this is a crucial week in Israel democracy, I'm not even sure anymore there's going to be election next year.
You think Netanyahu is trying to work towards leveraging this to declare some sort of state of emergency?
Look what he's doing. He's getting rid of all the gatekeepers, whether it's the head of the Shin Bet that said that he will resign because of the failure of October 7. The head of the military already gone. The last decision yesterday by the cabinet is to dismiss the Attorney General. This is at the time that people very close to Netanyahu are investigated by the Shin Bet for breach of security, for getting money from Qatar. So this is the time there is a real contradiction there, or breach of between what the legal system and what Netanyahu wants. And under these conditions, he's not only playing fiddle with everything is burning, he's the arsonist, because he wants to stay in power as long as this corruption trial goes on, and eventually that to completely derail, to destroy the trial. That's what's all about. And in the process, you hear, for instance, today, he releases secret information, confidential information from his conversation with the head of the Shin Bet. So the head of the Shin Bet goes to him and says, I'm worried that there are carnist, very far-right elements entering into the police. He tells it Netanyahu. Netanyahu replies to him, go and tell it to the Minister of National Security, who is the carnist, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Which, of course, instead of Netanyahu going saying that, and then the head of the Shin Bet knows that this is not the case. So we see actually that the very far right, the most extreme far right, is taking over the police. They are trying to dismiss the Attorney General, all the gatekeepers of Israel democracy, attacking the judiciary, the Supreme Court, one by one. So, yeah, if this continues like this, we see the trajectory of authoritarianism in Israel.
I mean, Giorgia, in terms of a possible endgame here, Israel Katz, the defense minister, has once again been speaking about Donald Trump's, as he put it, voluntary transfer plan for Gaza residents. This would involve removing, obviously, some or all of the population of Gaza, whether voluntarily or otherwise. Do we infer from that, though, that the presence of Trump in the White House has perhaps further emboldened Israel's government and Benjamin Netanyahu in particular to think, well, I can basically do what I like and nobody is even going to pretend to try and stop me?
Absolutely is my answer. I mean, he's hanging desperate for political survival, as Yossi pointed out, and the fact that Trump is the perfect model of violating the law, being above the law, and it can only embolden Netanyahu. In fact, they're closer than ever. And at this particular moment, Netanyahu is in crisis at home, has only two ways of escape. One is securing more lands, and we've seen 13 Jewish settlements in the West Bank being annexed or being under attack, and continuing with a war that, there was a ceasefire. Who broke the ceasefire? He says it wasn't him, but ultimately, you can't even ask Hamas now that you mentioned Salah al-Badawil, who was the spokesperson of Hamas, crucially. He's been killed with his wife. So where do we go for that now? We don't know. But with the letter that his people, like 41 of the survivors of Hamas captivity, plus 250 families, have written to demand the halt of the Israeli endless military action and to return to a negotiating table. I read a letter and they said it was written in blood and tears. Will Netanyahu give them any credit, any consideration? Could this ever be a chance that he goes back to the negotiating table? I don't see that as a particularly viable option, given what we've just said. But at some point, the people will be tired of being disrespected, legal infrastructures being violated.
And you can see that actually it's Stephen Witkoff actually is way more humane when you go and visit the families of the hostages and in the square in Tel Aviv, which is called the Hostages Square, and actually relates to them and to their suffering, why Netanyahu never visits them. He never went, for instance, to the communities on the border in Iroz, in Be'eri, and other places, to visit these places and to see what happened under his watch, which is telling about his state of mind.
Well, to now the ongoing self-sabotage of Elon Musk and the challenge he continues to present to various governments, i.e. are any benefits which might accrue from employing some of his admittedly useful products worth the costs in drama, angst and general neck area pain occasioned by dealing with the proprietor? Musk may have done his communications franchise Starlink out of a deal with Italy. Defence Minister Guido Crosetto explaining that any agreement had been suspended because, as he put it, of statements both by and about Musk. In particular, the Italians seem vexed by Musk's threats to turn off Starlink in Ukraine, for whose armed forces it has been vital. This is quite extraordinary, really, Giorgia, at a number of levels. You might have assumed that Italy's government looks like exactly the kind of people who would want to do business with Elon Musk and vice versa. They are a far-right nationalist government, but they are a far-right nationalist government who have been rock solid on Ukraine.
Correct. They were ready. Italy is ready to do deals with Musk. Let's not forget, in January, the photos that circulate around the world of Giorgia Meloni and Elon Musk smiling at each other in Palm Beach, invited by President Trump. What's on the table there in that occasion is a 1.5 billion euro of deal that was meant to provide Italy with this new enhanced encrypted communication system, which is something that Italy deeply needs because, first of all, the connectivity gaps between the mountain and the rural areas, but also Italy is prone to natural disasters such as earthquakes and flooding, so they can disrupt the traditional communication system. So being able to count on the satellite as the one being offered by SpaceX could be vital until the boutades by Elon Musk. And to put it down as Crosetto, minister, put it out, we are holding up due to the fact that the deal has been overshadowed by statements by and about Musk, and then effectively that is a pause for thoughts to consider what is useful and safe for Italy. What could be, Europe is also a potential ally in the longer term, because Musk could become volatile in Trump's administration. We know that Tesla's investors are not happy about his behavior. So Italy might resort to support or being supported by the IRIS European satellite system that will only be operational in 2030. However, because this could be a strategy in the future to prioritize relationships that perhaps are more solid than the ones that could be seeking with the US and Elon Musk.
I mean, Yossi, is it not strange, though, that any country, never mind a country of the considerable economic heft of Italy, is relying on an self-evidently erratic foreigner for vital communications infrastructure? Doesn't this sound like the sort of thing that countries, particularly countries the size of Italy, should be taking care of themselves?
I think this is exactly the point, I think, because not only we hear lessons in geostrategy with Musk and Trump, we also about good manners. So we have to thank them for everything. So here is the big thank you. Thank you, Musk, and thank you, Trump, to teach us the lesson that we can't rely on the United States. And we can't rely on multi-billionaires for our security, for our prosperity, for our communication. Here is the lesson. So thank you for that, because I think when it comes to security, European security, as a result of the disastrous meeting between Zelensky and Trump, there is all of a sudden 800 billion euros to invest in security. When Trump comes, what you mentioned earlier, of expelling 2.3 million, it's not voluntary migration, it's war crime, then we come with an alternative policy. And now with satellites. So we have to learn to rely on. So we have the technology, we have the know-how. The EU plus the UK is basically the wealthiest region in the world. So we can do that. But we refuse to do because it was easier to rely on someone else. So I think it's going to be painful. But through, I think, this pain, and we start doing the right thing, we'll come much stronger out of it.
Giorgia, is there also an amount of just basic political calculation going on here from the Italian government, who have recognised, and you can see polling across Europe on this, that even if Italy's government is popular, it was certainly popular enough that Italians elected it, Elon Musk is not popular. Most Europeans really don't like him. Is that the case in Italy as well?
Absolutely. The opposition have been shouting this for, as soon as since November, I would say that Musk is not a reliable party. And so Meloni, who before called him a genius, now that, we're not quite sure if is a genius or is an erratic lunatic. We have the populist like Salvini, who say they're ready to sign the deal tomorrow. It's the best thing that can happen to Italy. However, Salvini and Meloni are not vice prime minister, and the prime minister are not exactly best friends. So when the bickering create room for the oppositions, so we need to be careful. It's not just about Musk, it's not just about the US now. Not all that glitters is gold at the moment, but it's in the future, and it's all like political allies that you want to choose for the long term, even politically, because at some point the government is based on a coalition. The coalition needs to be kept solid, and if Salvini is pro Musk and Meloni and Tajani or the other members of the coalition are not that sure, that could cause friction in the government, in which the opposition can be joyful about.
Well, to Paris now, from where, as regular listeners to The Daily, like there are any other kind, will know, this show was broadcast for much of last week. There is, of course, very little not to like about Paris, although one campaign group believes they have thought of something. Report Your Pint, as they are known, are vexed by the insistence of some Parisian hostelries of passing off a mere 375 millilitre serving of beer as a pint, rather than the 500 millilitre glass, which is nearer, a pint being 568 millilitres. Aren't you glad you tuned in for this? So far, at least, Report Your Pint are confining their dissent to a mildly querulous website, rather than such more traditional Parisian methods as flinging cafe tables at riot police. Helpfully, I have just been in Paris, as I alluded to there in that introduction, and Yossi, I may have gone while in Paris to one or two bars. In all of them, however, the option was quite clearly shown on the menu. Would you like a 375 serving of beer or a 500 serving of beer? I did not see anybody advertising a pint. Have you ever run across such a thing in Paris?
No, but you've been through the Olympics there a month there, so I'm sure you had a few more beers than me recently in Paris. But I think all this idea of the shrinkflation, all the idea kind of I send you something as a pint, but you get something else. It's about kind of integrity and honesty in trade. But yeah, it's a strange thing. And I think the interesting about this kind of piece of news is all of a sudden I think consumers are becoming more aware that they are cheated by whoever sells them, whether it's online or in a pub.
Are they, Giorgia, becoming more aware or just more annoying?
First of all, let me share this. Less beer and more red wine is better for you.
Okay.
And when it comes to beer, sizes matter, because in France, not quite sure, but at least in the UK, we're ready for a whopping 21% increase in the price of beers, which, it would be over £5. So yes, we just need to be aware of our pockets at times of inflation, as Yossi was pointed out.
Yossi, there is a suggestion that some unscrupulous Parisian bartenders are serving their smaller measures in thicker glasses, therefore giving the impression that you have been served more beer than you actually have. Again, not entirely sure I'm buying that.
I don't know, but I appreciate the creativity. To be honest, I would never think about doing things like this, But you see how they're so creative about doing something like this, and then the balance between the broken and the cost of these glasses that are thicker, then how much they save. I don't know, but I just appreciate their creativity, if not their honesty.
Can I add some creativity here?
Please.
And also, can I share with you a skill? I'm just going to grab this opportunity. It's not a skill that I can put on my CV. So you're actually talking to the perfect Guinness pourer.
You are?
From a certificate,
Okay.
Yes.
You have a certificate?
I have a certificate. It goes back to my student years where I was working behind the bar and two unassuming people, customers, ordered a pint of Guinness. They came back 15 minutes later telling me I was the winner of the best Guinness pourer. But why am I taking this out now, apart from boasting a little bit?
Were they actually licensed Guinness inspectors sent by the Guinness brewery?
Absolutely. They show me their card. The certificate puts their name on it.
You didn't have to give them money for the certificate or anything?
No, I actually got the most extraordinary, huge chocolate bar that you could possibly imagine. I'm not going to name the brands. But what was my point? My point is you can be creative in cheating on customers, like increasing the white head of a Guinness. So it's less content in a pint and more froth that you do not drink. So let's talk about that too.
So I would just like to close by giving a shout out to a bartender who has stuck in my head for many decades. A friend of mine thought he'd found a way to a free drink in a pub in Australia many years ago. His drink got tidied up a little bit early. There was a certain amount left in the glass. So he went to the bar and remonstrated with the barmaid and said there was that much left in my pint when you cleared my glass up. She said, "I'm terribly sorry." Carefully poured exactly that small amount of beer into a fresh glass and handed it to him. I don't think we ever went back there, but I'm still glad I saw that.
Let's try.
Giorgia Scaturro and Yossi Mekelberg, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, the history of Zanzibar is prevalent in the work of Nobel laureate Abdulrazak Gurna, including his new book Theft, which is set in the 1990s and explores themes of injustice, class and personal growth. He spoke to Georgina Godwin about how tourism in Zanzibar changed from the 1990s onwards.
It was important because it was a kind of a period of transition from that earlier period of both austerity and also to some extent of authoritarianism. It's not that now there isn't authoritarian climate, but it's not like it was. It's not frightening like it was. So it's a transition also because there's I think a different generation. If I may say so, much better educated, unfortunately not educated in Zanzibar, because the education system in Zanzibar has collapsed, and this is one of the tragedies, one of the sadnesses about the way the government works, because they can afford to send their children abroad to study. But in any case, there's a generation of better educated people who are thinking differently, I think. Mm-hmm. I think this is contributing to progress in the sense of in the minds of people, and tourism has made a difference. TV has made a difference. Many other things. Kind of people are more open. There is more debate, I think, both in the mainland as well as in Zanzibar. You have to remember that Zanzibar has its own government, even though it's one nation, but really it's not one nation. So one always has to qualify, saying it's happening on the mainland, but it's also happening in Zanzibar. So the reason for the period is to try and catch something of that transition, both before the 90s. It doesn't just focus on the 90s, because some of the events are consequences.
And you're examining
before.
Examining historical, injustices, really.
Yeah. So it's best to see what was before and the consequences of them now, and how we're moving forward. So that's why 90s is interesting. 90s, 2000s.
It's called theft. Have you ever stolen anything?
Me? I remember when I first came to England, and I was just astonished at a number of books everywhere. And I remember stealing one book from W.H. Smith.
What was it?
It was the poems of John Keats.
I'm sure John Keats would have approved, don't you think?
But yeah, I mean, he wasn't getting anything anyway from those
exactly.
books.
But the theft of the title is not just one act of theft. It is about, as I say, these historical injustices too, and how the social dynamics work. It's about class. It's about wealth too.
It's about different kinds of thefts as well. You know, thefts of people's lives, of their youth or their happiness, or but also the hotel, the Tamarin Hotel, is a stolen house. There is an injustice also of a false accusation of theft. So there are different kinds of thefts.
Tell us about the three young people at the centre.
Yeah, well, I started in my thinking. I started with Badr, who's the one who is a powerless young person when we first meet him. Well, kind of for quite a lot of the novel. But he's falsely accused of stealing. That's where I began. So I wanted to sort of like examine that injustice and how it comes about and what a person does when falsely accused in this way. So that's clear. That's why I had him. How does he cope? So then I thought of the other young man, Karim, about the same age as him, maybe a little bit older, who's more fortunate, but he's more confident, he's got at least part of his family, his intelligence, his whatever. So, and he becomes his mentor to some extent. So these two has interesting relationship between two young people, two boys, and then two young men. And I was also originally thinking of a woman who suffers from epilepsy as a child. And I wanted to bring these together, these three ideas: injustice, how a person like Karim makes his way, and how a girl child, growing up with this burden, or rather the burden is on the parent's side, worrying about epilepsy, how she will cope. So all of them have some kind of a dilemma or problem to deal with. So I wanted to see about how people find their way in the world, really, people like this, with these sorts of undramatic issues, really. How do they find their way in the world, and how do they find their way together? Because at some point they come together. Those are my three. But of course they don't come unattached.
The mother.
There's the mother. There's the absent father. There are various people who are also part of what they have to come to an understanding of and move on.
That was Abdul Razak Gurna, 2021 Nobel Literature Laureate. Theft is published by Bloomsbury and is out now. You can listen to the full interview on Meet the Writers, which you can find on our website at monocle.com/radio. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Giorgia, Scaturro and Yossi Mekelberg. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.